also seek to take note in this debate around really listening to the contributions this morning. It is the implementation of the Murray Darling Basin Plan that I was probably the only person in this debate that was actually in this place at that time, when under the former Labor government in 2012, basin states signed off on a plan to, as was made at the time, achieve a triple bottom line. Remember the good old triple bottom line? You still included the economy and how it affected humans, and you brought in consideration of environmental outcomes. And as I've seen this plan roll out in the communities that I represent in the Southern Basin, obviously, but to a broader extent National Party communities right throughout regional eastern seaboard, it hasn't achieved the outcomes that were sought. The environment has been favoured, shall we say, over the economies, the health and the future of rural and regional basin communities. And the fun fact was, this wasn't the Murray Darling Basin Plan wasn't Moses coming off the mountain with a couple of tablets carved into stone, never to have been changed. The 10 Commandments back then are still the 10 Commandments today. That plan was meant to be adaptive and flexible, because what we knew then was that we didn't have the data and the information available to be making such prescriptive factors and prescriptive, pulling numbers really out of the air in many cases about what the environment really needed, what the irrigated agriculture sector needed, etc. Because the reality is, as we've rolled out those infrastructure projects and we've gotten better with our technology and we've gotten better with our metering of these waterways, we're getting a lot better data, and we're realising, to Senator Roberts' point, that we may be watering environmental assets at a really, really bad time for those environmental assets. I've been on the ground in the Barmah Forest. It's a tragedy what's happening there. Wet feet of gums in a country where you don't stay wet as a tree roots. Like, it's not, we haven't evolved that way. And yet, because again of inappropriate application of the plan, we're seeing really negative and unintended environmental, social and economic impacts across the board. So I would be calling on all basin states to remember that the Basin Plan was to be adaptive and to not be evangelical and fundamentalist about how this plan is rolled out. We've been highlighting in regional Victoria a whole lot of issues in the recent past. The conflict of interest for unregulated water brokers, that there's scant rules to guard against behaviour to manipulate water prices. Well-resourced corporate entities are gaining unfair advantage over family farms by manipulating the complexity of the water trading market. That's the reality. That's what, it's not me just saying. It's the actual ACCC review, the interim report recently handed down. The different regimes within basin states makes it very difficult for irrigators to ensure that the market works for them. And the hugely detrimental impact the expansion of the almond industry has had on delivering existing entitlement. And when we talk about, you might have heard in the debate today, natural constraints such as the Barmah choke, etc. Trying to get deliverable water that somebody has a share for down the river to be used in irrigated agriculture has been put under incredible pressure, because we have allowed unmitigated development of almond plantations downstream of the Barmah choke. And that's why we've been calling for a moratorium on those developments until we can actually understand the impact. Victoria state Labor government has done the right thing and has put a moratorium on it. But what that has meant is the South Australian and the New South Wales state governments are now allowing those developments to go ahead. State basin ministers could act right now to stop these developments occurring and putting untold pressure on the deliverability for existing entitlement holders, and I call them to act in the interests of our communities out in regional Australia. I guess we've all been calling that this is complex, it is very opaque, and we do need to make sure the market is fairer, more transparent and better regulated, not just for the environment, but for the over 9,200 irrigated agriculture businesses in the basin. The basin's home to 2.6 million people, producing billions of dollars worth of fabulous food product that we export around the world. And to prioritise, as has been happening over the last 8 years, to prioritise environmental assets over human outcomes, I think is a great tragedy. We've heard a lot about the potential issues about oversight, etc. And it's not just the Senate. I'm a great believer in the Senate holding the executive to account, and we've all had some great examples of how that's occurred. But in our democracy, it's not just this chamber and our committees that can hold executive government to account. The fourth estate, the media, has a fundamental role in actually ensuring that the public debate is well informed. And I just am reminded throughout this debate about an article Aaron Patrick from the Fin Review wrote, which I think really highlights the importance. It is topical on this particular issue itself, but it also the importance of the media. It's entitled "Soggy Scandal Doesn't Hold Water." But the article outlines how distorted the debate has been publicly. So there were claims on Twitter, hello, tomorrow is the big day for transparency and accountability in our biggest river system. They're talking about the Acting Auditor-General examining this particular issue of the $3.1 billion program. But instead, and I quote from the article, Acting Auditor-General Mellor, who is accountable to Parliament, not the government, concluded exactly the opposite. This wasn't the hidden smoking gun. Joyce was kept in the dark by his department on key facts. The prices weren't above commercial valuations, and the scheme, which is driven by environmentalists, has obtained almost all the 2,075 gigalitres of water targeted to revive wetlands and bird sanctuaries in Australia's most important river system. The Acting Auditor-General's conclusion received cursory coverage, unlike the original Watergate story. And so here we have a journalist actually doing his job, reporting the facts, not letting emotions override and perceived political motives, being an activist, shall we say, but actually reporting on the facts and ensuring that the public is kept informed of what the Acting Auditor-General actually had to say about this. And so I would commend the media for continuing to do this. Look, I've been here as the Labor Party implemented the Murray Darling Basin Plan, and their management of water and water recovery has been incredibly damaging to our communities. Remember the Swiss cheese effect? We had water being bought out by the Labor Party Senate leader when she was Water Minister, Senator Wong, in horrific volumes for an outrageous amount of money. Stranded assets as water was purchased here, there, everywhere, no strategic intent, and we're still dealing with the fallout of those purchases that long ago. She made the largest water purchase ever, $303 million in the Murrumbidgee. It was the Labor government who embarked on a campaign of damaging direct water purchases from our irrigators, and there is a litany of responses. Our government has commissioned a piece of work by Robbie Sefton on the socio-economic impacts of these buybacks on our communities, and it is clear, it is unequivocal. We know it because we live there, but it is here, tabled in the Senate, that it has had a significant detrimental impact on people's lives and livelihoods. You can't ignore the data, and you cannot take any more water from our irrigated agriculture communities. The 450 gig will not be coming from our farmers, will not be coming from the Southern Basin irrigated agriculture communities. Enough is enough. You've taken enough. There will be no more. And we're unapologetic about standing up for our regional communities and what they do best, which is produce fabulous, clean, green food. So we're calling for the Murray Darling Basin Authority to be split into separate entities, scrapping the 450 gigalitres of water recovery, no new extraction licences to be issued, unless we can actually guarantee there's no increased risk to existing entitlement holders. And state governments need to get serious about that. We are very concerned in the Southern Basin about the floodplain harvesting practices in the Northern Basin, which Senator Roberts touched on, that do actually impact on flows through the system. We need to get serious, as the Inspector General for the Murray Darling Basin Plan outlined in his report, that we need to meter that properly. We need to actually get the data and understand what's happening, because there is a lot of mistrust, and rightfully so, through basin communities about the role of governments in how this plan has been implemented. And the ACCC interim report that was just handed down recently, no surprises there to basin communities, no surprises in its recommendations and further work plan on what's actually needed. We need to regulate these water brokers. We need to understand what's happening with foreign ownership of our most precious asset, water. And we need to make sure that we've got improved transparency. I want to see regional communities grow and prosper and thrive, and they cannot do that unless they have access to water. It's that fundamental. And we need to make sure that as we roll out a plan that all state basin ministers agreed to in 2012, and the federal government at the time under Kevin Rudd, I think it was, but who could be sure, it did change a lot back then, signed up to. I noticed you smiling, Senator. You were there too. But that it actually delivers on its intent. It was not ever meant to be a plan only for the environment and only for South Australia. It is a plan to continue the productive capacity of regional communities right throughout the Murray-Darling.